They say a house holds the memories of those who lived within it, the echoes of laughter, the warmth of conversations, the invisible mark of love. But what happens when the owners leave, and what they leave behind is not just the memories, but their guardian? This is the story of Patch, an old mutt with one eye as blue as a summer sky and the other as brown as the autumn earth. He wasn't abandoned on a highway, but forgotten in a home. To the world, he was a problem to be solved, an inconvenient item in a house that needed to be sold. But to himself, he was a soldier at his post, the last sentinel of a departed happiness, waiting for a car that would never return. On the other side, there is Clara, a young and ambitious real estate agent whose success is measured in commissions and quick sales. To her, a house is an asset, an emotion is a liability. When assigned to sell the problem property where Patch lives, she sees the old dog not as a soul, but as an obstacle between her and her next bonus. But when a woman who only understands numbers is forced to confront a loyalty that cannot be calculated, and a dog who lives in the past becomes the key to her future, the walls of that old house bear witness to a different kind of transaction. This is not a story about selling a property. It's about discovering what truly has value. It is the journey of a soul who learned to see not with her eyes, but with her heart, guided by a dog who guarded the silence. Clara's success could be measured by the sound of her heels on the polished marble of the 34th floor of the Apex Tower building. Each step was a rapid, precise, confident staccato, a rhythm that echoed the beat of her own ambitious heart. At 26, she wasn't just an employee at Prestige Realty, she was a system, an algorithm of human efficiency wrapped in designer suits and an expensive perfume that smelled of success and a hint of loneliness. Her colleagues called her the closer, a nickname spoken with a mix of admiration and fear. She was the expert at turning homes into assets, memories into market potential, and problems into negotiating opportunities. Her apartment, overlooking the city's concrete skyline, was her sanctuary of minimalism. White walls, designer furniture with sharp angles, and not a single personal photograph. It was a space that told no stories, only reflected success, as flawless and impersonal as the image she projected to the world. It was on a Tuesday morning, with rain beating against the panoramic office windows, that the name Peterson landed on her desk. The file folder, a pale and stained yellow, looked like an artifact from another era on her desk of glass and chrome. Her boss, Mark Davies, a man whose own ambition had been softened by years and 2 divorces, handed it to her with a sigh that was part challenge, part exhaustion. 142 Elm Street, an elderly couple, the Petersons, Arthur and Mary. He passed away from a heart attack 3 months ago. She, Mary, is in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's and was moved to a nursing home last week. The children, one in Seattle and one in London, want a quick sale. Liquid and fast were their words. They don't want to be involved. Clara opened the folder. The photos of the facade showed a colonial-style house that had once been the American dream, but now looked like a tired war veteran. The white paint peeled like sunburnt skin, the shutters on an upstairs window hung crooked like a lazy wink, and the garden, once surely a source of pride, was now in silent rebellion against order. "Looks like the house is mourning along with the family," Mark commented, more to himself than to her. Clara ignored the sentimentality. "What's the structural issue? Foundation? Roof?" she asked, her mind already calculating repair costs versus the as-is sale price. "The structure is surprisingly solid," Mark said, leaning forward. "The problem is a detail, a living attachment." Clara raised her perfectly arched eyebrow. "Tenants?" "Worse," Mark said. "A dog. The kids left him there, an old mutt named Patch. A neighbor, a Mr. Henderson, has been tossing a bag of kibble over the fence once a day, but he barely touches the food. The kids said animal control would get him, but with the city's budget cuts, they have a weeks-long waiting list. He's your problem now, Clara. Get rid of him, prep the house, and sell it. You have a free hand and a 10% bonus if you close the deal in under 30 days. A dog. Of all the logistical and financial problems she loved to solve, this was the most irritating. A biological problem, a messy, unpredictable, and worst of all, potentially emotional hindrance. She remembered the hamster she had in childhood, a birthday gift that died a week later. The memory of the small, cold body in her hands and the crying she couldn't control made her jaw tighten. Emotions were inefficient. "Consider it handled," she said, her voice a tone of metallic finality. The commission and bonus from this property would launch her into the next tier of her career, maybe even a junior partnership. No old, depressed mutt was going to stand in her way. That afternoon, the sound of her white Tesla's tires crushing the damp, dead leaves at the entrance of 142 Elm Street felt like a desecration, the electric hum of the future invading a sanctuary of the past. The house seemed to be sleeping under the pale afternoon sun, a slumbering giant dreaming of better days. As she got out of the car, the air smelled of wet earth, rotting wood, and a loneliness so palpable it almost made her cough. She adjusted her blazer, her armor against the world, and walked up the stone porch, her keys in hand. And then she saw him. Lying on a worn-out old doormat with the word "welcome" nearly faded away was the detail. He was a medium-sized dog. His black and white coat, which likely was well-groomed, was now matted with dirt and sorrow. He lifted his head slowly, a movement that seemed to require immense effort. And that's when Clara saw the eyes, and her world stopped for a fraction of a second. One was an icy, almost white blue, a ghost's eye that seemed to see not just her, but all of her ambitions and her fears. The other, a deep, warm brown that seemed to hold the memory of every caress, every walk, every night at the foot of the bed. It was a gaze of impossible duality, the wisdom of a lifetime of love, and the pain of absolute abandonment. He didn't bark. He just watched her, and a low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but of a weary warning, the last effort of an exhausted guardian. This place still has a heart, and I am lying on it. Clara stopped, her hand inches from the doorknob. For an instant, all her efficiency, her logic, her ambition seemed ridiculous in the face of this living statue of loyalty and loss. She shook her head, a sharp movement to dismiss the unwanted feeling. He was an obstacle, an item on her to-do list. "Okay, buddy," she muttered to herself, her voice sounding strangely thin in the heavy silence of the place. As she turned the key in the lock, the sound of rusting metal echoed in the still air, and she felt the weight of those two-colored eyes on her back, judging her every move. She wasn't just entering a house, she was invading a shrine to a broken heart. The door opened with a long, drawn-out groan, the sound of a memory being forced awake. The air that met Clara on the other side was thick and still, a complex mixture of dust, dried lavender, and the unmistakable scent of a dog that hadn't seen a bath in months. It was the smell of stagnant time. Clara wrinkled her nose, a gesture of restrained disgust, and took a step inside, her heels echoing profanely on the hardwood floor. The first thing she did, out of pure professional instinct, was to pull open the heavy velvet curtains. The afternoon sunlight entered reluctantly, like a shy visitor, and revealed the scene in painful detail. The house wasn't dirty in the sense of neglect, but rather frozen. A half-empty teacup sat on the small table next to a large leather armchair, the liquid inside now a dark, solid stain. A knitted shawl was thrown over the arm of the sofa, as if its owner had just gotten up to answer the door. And everywhere, on every surface, there were photographs. Dozens of them, in silver, wood, and brass frames. A young couple in black and white on their wedding day. The same faces, now with laugh lines, holding babies. The family growing, the children becoming teenagers, then adults. And in almost every photo, somewhere was Patch. A clumsy puppy with ears too big for his head. A proud adult dog in the middle of a family picnic. An older companion, already with white fur on his muzzle, lying at Mr. Peterson's feet. Clara walked through the room like an archaeologist in a newly discovered tomb. Every object was an artifact of a life she couldn't comprehend. She, whose only personal item on her desk was a designer pen holder, was in a museum of affection. On her tablet, she began to take notes, her professional, cold voice dictating to the Notes app. Remove all personal items, neutral paint required on all walls, polish floors, animal odor present, request deep cleaning and ozonation. Each command was an attempt to erase the evidence of that life, to turn this sanctuary into a sellable product. She moved to the kitchen. Dishes were in the drying rack, and a calendar on the wall was still turned to the month from 3 months ago, the day of Arthur Peterson's death, circled in red pen with the note, "Grandfather's birthday." Next to the refrigerator, held by a bone-shaped magnet, was a list of emergency phone numbers. Dr. Evans, vet, was at the top, followed by dog sitter, Mrs. Gable. Clara felt a pang of irritation. They had a dog sitter, yet the children couldn't even be bothered to find a new home for him. She pulled her phone from her purse, the cold intention of calling animal control once again on her mind. "Yes, hello, I'd like to report an abandoned animal at 142 Elm Street. Yes, a dog. The name is Patch." The voice on the other end of the line was polite but firm. "Ma'am, as previously stated, we have a waiting list. Our agents are overwhelmed. Unless the animal poses an immediate danger, it could be 1 to 2 weeks." "A danger?" Clara almost laughed. "He barely moves. He's the opposite of a danger. He's depression in dog form." Hanging up the phone in frustration, she realized she was stuck. Stuck with the dog, stuck with the memories, stuck with a feeling she couldn't name. Determined to be productive, she went upstairs, the creak of the steps sounding like sighs. The master bedroom was the most painful. The bed was unmade on one side, Mary's side, the pillow still holding the impression of her head. Arthur's side was perfectly neat, untouched. On his nightstand, a book with reading glasses resting on the open page. And on the floor, next to that side of the bed, was a round dog bed, the fabric sunken and worn by the weight of a loyal body that had slept there for years, watching over its owner's sleep. Next to the bed, a small leather-bound journal. Clara knew she shouldn't, that it was an invasion of privacy, but the house seemed to pull her in, forcing her to understand. She opened it. It was Mary Peterson's notes, the handwriting becoming increasingly shaky on the last few pages. Most were notes about the garden, about the grandchildren, but the last entry, dated the day she was taken away, was almost illegible. "Arthur is gone. The house is so quiet. Only Patch still hears me. He lays his head on my lap and licks my tears. He knows, he always knows. Who will take care of my boy?" Clara shut the journal abruptly, her heart pounding. "Who will take care of my boy?" The phrase echoed in the silence of the room. She looked out the window and saw him down below, in the backyard. He wasn't lying down. He was sitting, upright, his body tense, staring intently at the back gate, the one that led to the garage. He was waiting for the familiar sound of Arthur's car engine, the sound that always announced the end of the workday, the moment for a scratch behind the ears. In that instant, Clara's irritation morphed into something more complex, something uncomfortable. She was no longer looking at an obstacle. She was looking at a broken heart, one that refused to accept the truth. She went downstairs, her professional mind fighting against the wave of an emotion she didn't want to feel. She stood at the back door, watching him. He didn't even turn his head. His loyalty was so absolute, his vigil so focused that her presence was irrelevant. He wasn't guarding the house against her, he was guarding the house for them. And Clara, the closer, the master of turning homes into houses, felt for the first time in a long time the deep and painful difference between the two. The days that followed devolved into a strange and silent Cold War. Clara, armed with her digital clipboard, laser measuring tape, and an iron will, tried to impose her will upon the house. She hired a cleaning crew that arrived in a loud, white van, men and women who looked at Patch with a mixture of pity and impatience. The dog, for his part, did not move from his post on the doormat. He watched as they dragged furniture, bagged up trinkets, and scrubbed away the scent of a lifetime with lemon-scented disinfectants. He endured the noise of vacuums and floor polishers with a regal stoicism, but when one of the cleaners tried to remove his worn bed from beside the armchair, a low, deep growl coming from the bowels of the earth froze the man in place. Clara, from her command post in the kitchen, shouted, "Leave it! Just clean around it!" She justified it to herself by saying it was to avoid a lawsuit if the dog bit someone. But deep down, the image of the note in Mary's journal, "Who will take care of my boy?" haunted her. With the house now a clean, sterile echo of its former self, Clara began the work of staging. She brought in impersonal, modern rental furniture that clashed violently with the soul of the house. She placed a gray sofa where Arthur's leather armchair had once been, and a glass coffee table in place of an old wooden chest that had served as a repository for photo albums. With every change, she felt Patch's gaze on her, a silent judgment from those two-colored eyes. He seemed to understand that she wasn't just moving furniture, she was desecrating memories, systematically erasing the ghosts he was trying so hard to keep alive. Forced to spend long hours at the property to supervise repairs and meet with photographers, Clara began, against her will, to become an observer of Patch's routine. It was a routine of painful precision, a living clock powered by hope and memory. Every morning he would limp slowly to the food bowl that the neighbor, Mr. Henderson, left. He would eat a few bites, just enough to keep him going, and drink a little water. Then he would make a slow round of the property's perimeter, his nose to the ground, as if checking that the borders of his kingdom were still secure. The rest of the morning was spent on his doormat, dozing in the sun, but never in a deep sleep. The slightest breeze, the sound of a distant car would make his ears twitch. But it was in the afternoon that his true vigil began. Around 5 o'clock, with a punctuality that defied logic, he would get up and walk to the front gate, the one facing the street, and there he would sit, upright, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the curve in the road. Clara, from inside the house, would watch him from the living room window. The first day she found it pathetic, the second curious. By the third day, she found herself holding her breath when a car of the same model as the one she'd seen in the Petersons' family photos came around the bend. Her heart gave an inexplicable leap, a spark of hope that wasn't her own. The car drove straight past. She saw Patch's shoulders slump, an almost human sigh escaping his chest before he turned and went back to his post on the porch. That scene repeated itself every day, and every day Clara became a reluctant participant in that wait. She began to notice the details, the way his tail would give a single hopeful wag when an engine sounded familiar, the way he would tilt his head, his two-colored eyes narrowing to see better. She was no longer just seeing a dog. She was witnessing an act of faith so pure and unwavering that it frightened her. Her own life was built on logic, on the cold acceptance of facts. Loyalty to her was contractual. But Patch's loyalty wasn't based on any logic. It was a force of nature, as stubborn and irrational as love itself. One afternoon, while arranging a showing for a potential buyer, she heard him whimpering in his sleep. They were low, mournful sounds, his paws twitching as if he were running in a dream, running in a field that no longer existed, alongside a master who would not return. The sound hit her with an unexpected force. It was the sound of the purest grief she had ever heard. Without thinking, she went out onto the porch and knelt at a safe distance. "Hey," she whispered, the words sounding strange on her own lips. "It's okay. It's just a dream." Patch woke with a start, his eyes wild for a second before they focused on her. The growl started, but it died in his throat. He just stared at her, confusion and pain in his gaze. And for the first time, Clara didn't see an obstacle. She saw a creature so deeply immersed in its own sorrow that there was no room for anything else. And in a dark corner of her own soul, she recognized an echo of that feeling. The sky that Thursday evening was a sickly purple, the color of an old bruise. Clara, normally as attentive to weather forecasts as she was to stock market fluctuations, had ignored the warnings. She was obsessed. An offer had been made on the house, but it was low, almost an insult. The potential buyer had cited the property's depressing atmosphere, a veiled criticism that Clara felt as a personal attack on her competence. Determined to prove she could transform any space, she decided to work late, rearranging the lighting, adding mirrors to create a sense of space, and spraying a freshly baked vanilla cookie-scented spray that her boss swore worked miracles. As she worked, the storm arrived. It wasn't a gradual advance, but a sudden, violent assault. The wind howled through the cracks of the old windows, sounding like a chorus of lost souls. The rain beat on the roof with the fury of 1,000 drumming fingers. And then, with a sharp hum followed by a dry crack, the house plunged into absolute darkness. The power had gone out. Clara froze in the middle of the living room, the synthetic vanilla scent now cloying in the thick air. The silence that followed the blackout was almost more terrifying than the noise of the storm. It was a heavy, ancient silence, filled only by the sound of her own heart beating wildly in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she tried to turn on the flashlight. The battery? 4%. A curse escaped her lips. She, the queen of preparation, had forgotten to charge her phone. The first thunderclap sounded, not in the distance, but directly over the house. It was a visceral roar that made the floorboards vibrate beneath her feet. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a fraction of a second, turning the furniture covered in white sheets into ghostly figures. And it was in that flash of light that she remembered she was not alone. The dog, Patch. A primitive fear, one she hadn't felt since childhood, took hold of her. The fear of the dark, of being in an unfamiliar place, of noises she couldn't explain. Every creak of the old house was now a footstep. Every tap of a branch on the window was a hand trying to get in. She curled up on the impersonal gray sofa she herself had chosen, hugging her knees, trying to make herself small. The image of the confident businesswoman dissolved, leaving behind only a frightened young woman in a dark house full of ghosts. It was then that she heard a different sound. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the rain, it was the sound of claws scratching softly on the hardwood floor, coming from the direction of the front door. A slow, hesitant sound. Her phone's flashlight flickered and died, plunging her back into total darkness. The sound of the claws was getting closer. Clara held her breath, terror chilling her veins. It was him, the dog that growled at her, the guardian of the territory she had invaded. Her mind raced, imagining the worst. The scratching stopped right next to the sofa. She could feel a presence there in the dark, could almost hear the slow, heavy breathing. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for a growl, a bark, perhaps something worse. Instead, what she felt was a soft, warm weight on her knee. She opened her eyes. She couldn't see anything, but the weight was there. It was a muzzle, a damp, cold muzzle resting gently on her jeans. Hesitantly, she raised her trembling hand and moved it toward the sound of the breathing. Her fingers touched something soft and furry, an ear. The ear didn't pull away. Instead, the weight on her knee increased. He was laying his head on her lap. Another thunderclap roared, louder than the last, and the whole house seemed to shake. Clara let out a muffled cry, a sound of pure panic. In response, the dog shifted, not to move away, but to nestle closer. He let out a low sigh, a sound of comfort, as if to say, "I am here. Do not be afraid. I know the sounds of this house. I know the storms." And in that moment, in the total darkness, something inside Clara broke. The dam she had built for years to hold back her own sorrows, her own loneliness, her own longing for a connection she told herself she didn't need, simply gave way. Tears began to stream down her face, silent at first, then in sobs that shook her entire body. She wasn't crying because of the storm. She was crying for her empty life, for her plawless and soulless apartment, for having become a person who saw an act of loyalty as an inconvenience. She sunk her fingers into Patch's thick, matted fur, clinging to him as if he were a life raft in an ocean of darkness. And he stayed there, motionless, a solid, warm pillar in the midst of the chaos. He didn't know her, had no reason to like her, but in her moment of greatest fear, he offered her no judgment, just presence. He, the guardian of silence, had shared his silence with her, and in that simple act, Clara felt a wave of gratitude and connection so powerful it left her breathless. The storm outside continued to rage, but the storm inside her, for the first time in a long time, began to calm. Clara didn't know when she had fallen asleep, but she awoke to the soft sound of birds singing and the pale morning light filtering through the windows. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Her neck was stiff, her body sore from sleeping sitting up on the sofa, and there was a warm weight on her feet. She looked down and saw Patch, curled in a tight ball on the floor, his body pressed against her ankles. He was no longer on her lap, but he hadn't abandoned her. He had stood guard all night. The house was silent, except for the occasional drip of water from the eaves outside. The storm had washed the world clean, and it seemed to have washed away the hostility between them as well. Carefully, so as not to wake him, Clara stood up. The movement stirred him anyway. He lifted his head, his two-colored eyes watching her, but this time there was no growl, no tension. There was only a quiet expectation. Clara went to the kitchen. The power was still out. She opened the back door and looked out at the garden. The bag of kibble that Mr. Henderson had thrown over was soaked and scattered in the mud, unfit to eat. Without thinking, she grabbed her car keys and left. She drove to the only 24-hour convenience store in the next town, her designer shoes sinking into the mud on the path. Under the store's fluorescent lights, she felt out of place. She walked past the aisles of cleaning products and canned goods and found herself in the pet section. It was an aisle she had never visited in her adult life. She looked at the colorful packages, the cheerful names, the promises of complete nutrition and irresistible flavor. She had no idea what to buy. She remembered Patch's appearance, old, his teeth probably worn. She picked up a bag of food for senior dogs and, on impulse, added a few cans of wet food with gravy, a package of bone-shaped biscuits, and a new shiny metal bowl to her basket. As she paid, the cashier, a woman with a tired smile, commented, Someone's having a feast today. Clara just nodded, feeling like an imposter. Back at the house, she found Patch exactly where she had left him, waiting at the kitchen door. She opened the can of wet food, and the smell of meat and gravy filled the air. She put a generous portion in the new bowl and pushed it across the floor toward him. Patch approached cautiously, sniffed the offering, and then looked up at Clara. It was a look that asked, "Is this for me? From you?" Clara leaned against the counter and said softly, "Yes, it's for you. Eat." And he ate. He ate with a hunger that revealed how little he had been eating. He ate until the bowl was clean, licking every last trace of gravy. When he finished, he walked over to Clara and, for the first time, gave a slight wag of his tail. It was a short, almost imperceptible movement, but to Clara it was like thunderous applause. She had done something right. That day, a new silent agreement was established between them. Clara canceled the showings with potential buyers. Instead, she spent the day doing a different kind of work. She found a hose out back and, with a patience she didn't know she possessed, gave Patch a bath. He protested at first, but then seemed to surrender to the warmth of the water and the touch of her soapy hands on his matted fur. Months of dirt ran down the drain, revealing a surprisingly soft coat underneath. As she dried him with an old towel she found in the closet, she discovered how thin he was under all that fur. She could feel every rib, every vertebra. She didn't go back to her apartment that night. She ordered a pizza, ate it sitting on the kitchen floor, and shared the crusts with Patch. Later, while working on her laptop, with the power now back on, she felt a nudge on her arm. It was Patch, with one of the old, dusty, frayed rope toys in his mouth. He dropped it at her feet, his tail wagging a little harder this time. An invitation. Clara looked at the toy, then at him. A part of her mind screamed about deadlines, emails, and the commission she was losing, but another part, a part she was just getting to know, made her close the laptop. She picked up the toy. "Okay, buddy," she said, a genuine smile forming on her lips for the first time in days. "You win." They played on the living room floor amidst the staging furniture that now seemed even more ridiculous. The house, which for so long had been a mausoleum of silence and pain, filled with the soft sound of a toy being tugged, and occasionally the sound of a laugh that Clara barely recognized as her own. She was no longer selling a property, she was beginning to inhabit a home, and she realized that the obstacle she had so badly wanted to remove had somehow become the only reason that place still had a heart. The transformation of 142 Elm Street in the following weeks was remarkable, but not in the way Prestige Realty had hoped. The lifeless, gray staging furniture was still there, but now there was a perpetually full water bowl in the kitchen. There was a rope toy in the middle of the living room, and in the backyard, the grass, once yellowed and sad, was beginning to show a vibrant green, watered not just by the rain, but by the new sprinkler system that Clara, to her own astonishment, had learned to fix by watching tutorials on YouTube. Clara's transformation was even more profound. Her stiletto heels were replaced by practical flats, her designer suits by jeans and comfortable sweaters. Her mornings no longer began with reading the stock market, but with a slow walk through the neighborhood with Patch. He limped a little, and their pace was that of two old friends out for a stroll, not a young executive getting her cardio in. He didn't need a leash. He walked beside her, his shoulder brushing against her leg, his gaze attentive to her every move. During these walks, Clara began to talk to him. She told him about her day, about the pressure from her boss, about the empty apartment waiting for her in the city. Patch would listen, his head tilted, his two-colored eyes offering a silent wisdom that none of her colleagues could ever match. Her boss, Mark Davies, started calling, the impatience in his voice growing with each passing day. "Clara, what's the situation? It's been 3 weeks. Where are the offers? Have you removed the attachment?" "I'm working on a new strategy, Mark," she would reply, her voice calm and firm. "This property requires a more personalized approach." Clara's personalized strategy wasn't for the buyers, but for Patch. She took him to Dr. Evans, the veterinarian whose number was on the fridge. The old doctor recognized her from the photos in the Petersons' house. "You must be the real estate lady," he said, examining Patch on his metal table. "I'm glad someone is looking after him. Mary used to call me every week, worried." The diagnosis was what Clara expected: arthritis, a slight cataract in the blue eye, and what Dr. Evans called a broken heart. He prescribed anti-inflammatories and a good quality diet. "But the best medicine you're already giving him," the doctor said, looking at Clara over his glasses, "is company. He's a one-owner dog, and he's lost two." The visit to the vet solidified something in Clara. Patch wasn't a temporary problem. He was a responsibility, one she had accepted on the night of the storm, and she wasn't going to abandon him. It was then that the idea came to her, an idea so unorthodox, so anti-business that the old Clara would have laughed at it, but the new Clara embraced it like a lifeline. She didn't need to remove Patch from the house. She needed to find a buyer who saw Patch not as a flaw, but as what he truly was, the soul of the place. She completely rewrote the property's online listing. She removed the cold, staged photos and took new ones herself. Photos that showed the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window and illuminating Patch's water bowl. A photo of Arthur's leather armchair, which she had brought back from storage, with Patch's bed beside it. And the main photo? A portrait of Patch sitting on the porch, his coat now clean and brushed, his two-colored eyes no longer empty, but filled with a serene dignity. And in the description text, she added a section that nearly gave her boss a heart attack when he read it. A unique opportunity. This is not just a house, it is a home with a guardian. The sale of this property comes with a special and non-negotiable condition. The current resident, Patch, a loyal and loving senior dog, must be adopted along with the house. He is the soul of this property, a living testament to the love that filled these walls for years. We are looking not just for a buyer, but for a family who understands that the greatest value of a home is not in its walls, but in the love it holds. Patch comes with all veterinary expenses prepaid for 1 year. The market's reaction was immediate. Dozens of emails and calls flooded Prestige Realty. Most were from curious onlookers or people accusing her of being insane. But some were different. They were emails from families who told stories of their own dogs, from people who understood what she was trying to do. And among them, there was an email from a young couple, the Millers. They had 2 young daughters and had just lost their own elderly dog. "We weren't looking for a house right now, but we saw your listing and Patch's photo, and we felt it was a sign. A house with a dog waiting for a family? It sounds like a dream. We would love to meet them. Both of them." Clara read the email 3 times, a smile spreading across her face. She looked at Patch, who was dozing at her feet. "I think we found someone, buddy. I think we found your new family." She was no longer thinking about the commission, the bonus, or her career. She was thinking about the look in the eyes of 2 little girls when they met a dog with one blue eye and one brown who just needed a place to live out his golden years in peace. The Saturday of the Millers' visit dawned bright and sunny, the kind of day that makes even the oldest houses seem full of promise. Clara, however, was a bundle of nerves, a feeling she hadn't experienced since her first day at Prestige Realty. She wasn't preparing for a sale, she was preparing for a first date on someone else's behalf. She had spent the entire morning in a flurry of activity. She bathed Patch, brushed his coat until it shone, and even tried to tie a blue bandana around his neck, which he promptly shook off and turned into a chew toy. She baked real cookies in the kitchen, filling the house with a genuine aroma of home, not the chemical scent of a spray. She was in the backyard tossing the rope toy for Patch when the Miller's car, a family minivan with unicorn stickers on the window, pulled up out front. Her heart leaped. "Okay, buddy," she whispered to Patch, kneeling down and looking into his 2-colored eyes. "Be yourself. Show them how amazing you are." The couple, Tom and Sarah Miller, got out of the car, followed by two little girls, Lily, perhaps 7, and little Maya, about 4. They were exactly as Clara had imagined: kind faces, comfortable clothes, and an air of warm normalcy. Sarah had a smile that looked like it could calm any storm. Tom had the look of a patient, kind man. "Clara?" Sarah asked, approaching. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, and this house, it's even more charming in person." "Welcome," Clara said, her voice a little higher than usual. "Feel free to look at everything, but I know who you really came to see." As if on cue, Patch appeared at the kitchen door, his tail wagging slowly, his curious gaze fixed on the two small figures in the yard. Lily, the older one, stopped suddenly. Her eyes widened. "Mom," she whispered, pointing, "it's him. It's the dog from the ad. He has a blue eye." Patch, who was usually reserved with strangers, seemed to sense something different. He didn't growl. Instead, he took a few hesitant steps forward, his body relaxed. Clara held her breath. Little Maya, without any fear, let go of her father's hand and ran toward Patch. "Doggy!" she squealed in her high-pitched toddler voice. Clara's heart froze. Tom and Sarah took a step forward, ready to intervene, but it wasn't necessary. Patch stopped, and when little Maya reached him, he did something Clara had never seen him do. He lay down on the ground, rolling onto his side and exposing his belly, the highest display of submission and trust a dog can offer. Maya burst into laughter and threw herself on top of him, hugging his neck with her little arms. Patch just licked her face, his tail beating a soft rhythm on the grass. Lily approached more slowly, with more reverence. She knelt down and held out her hand. Patch turned his head and sniffed it gently before giving her fingers a lick. Tom and Sarah looked at the scene and then at Clara, Sarah's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He's wonderful," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I felt a lump form in my own throat. "He was just waiting," I said, my voice barely coming out. "He was just waiting for the right family." They spent the next 2 hours exploring the house, but it was just a formality. The girls never left Patch's side. They discovered his bed next to the armchair, his toys, and listened intently as Clara told the story of how he waited at the gate every day. Tom inspected the structure, the plumbing, but his gaze always returned to his wife and daughters playing with the old dog on the living room floor. At the end of the visit, they gathered on the porch. The afternoon sun cast a golden light on the scene. "We'll take it," Tom said, the decision clear and simple in his voice. "The house, and, of course, Patch." Sarah knelt in front of Clara. "I don't know how to thank you. Most people would have just gotten rid of him. What you did, it was extraordinary." "I didn't do anything," I replied, and I meant it. He did it all. He just needed someone to stop and listen to what he was saying. As they filled out the initial paperwork right there on the porch table, Clara felt a mixture of overwhelming joy and a pang of sorrow that surprised her. She was happy for Patch, happier than she had ever been closing any deal. But the thought of not seeing him anymore, of no longer having their morning walks and silent conversations, left an unexpected void in her chest. As the Millers were leaving, little Lily ran up to Clara and hugged her. "Thank you for taking care of our dog until we got here." The sentence hit her like a lightning bolt. Taking care of our dog until we got here. She hadn't been a real estate agent, not even a savior. She had been a temporary guardian, a bridge between Patch's painful past and his happy future. And in realizing that, Clara understood that success wasn't closing a deal. It was opening a door to another being's happiness. And that commission, she knew, was priceless. The transition period was bittersweet for Clara. Officially, it was the due diligence and contract closing period, a process she normally navigated with the precision of a surgeon. But this time, every signed document, every approved inspection was another step toward her farewell to Patch. She savored every moment. The morning walks became longer, the pace even slower. She would take him for car rides with the windows down and delighted in watching him stick his head out, the wind messing up his fur, his two-colored eyes half closed in pure bliss. She bought him a new orthopedic bed and placed it next to the old one, letting him choose. He sniffed the new one, but continued to sleep on the old one, the one that still had the scent of his former owners. The Millers were wonderful. They visited the house a few more times, not to inspect, but to spend time with Patch, so the transition would be smooth. They brought new toys, treats, and most importantly, they brought their laughter and warm energy, which began to fill the silent corners of the house. Clara would watch them from a distance, feeling like a foster mother about to hand over her child. She saw how Patch, who once only had eyes for the gate, now divided his attention, his tail wagging whenever he heard Lily's or Maya's voice. He was starting to attach. He was starting to heal. The day of the key handover arrived faster than Clara would have liked. It was a Friday. She spent the entire morning with Patch, sitting with him on the porch, brushing his coat and whispering promises that he would be happy. When the Millers' minivan pulled up, her heart tightened. The family got out of the car, their eyes shining with excitement. "We're ready to move in," Tom said, carrying a box with "kitchen" written in large letters. Clara forced a smile. "Welcome to your new home." She guided them through the house one last time, explaining the final details. But everyone's attention was on Patch, who seemed to understand the finality of the moment. He walked beside Clara, his body brushing against hers, a constant reminder of his presence. The final moment happened in the living room. Clara knelt in front of Patch. "Okay, buddy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is where I leave you. This is your family now. Be a good boy." She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his fur, inhaling his scent one last time. A single tear escaped and fell onto his soft coat. Patch licked her face, a gesture that was both a goodbye and a thank you. Clara stood up and handed the keys to Sarah. Their hands touched. "Thank you, Clara, for everything," Sarah said, her voice full of genuine emotion. "You'll always be welcome here. You're part of this house's story now, and his story." Clara just nodded, unable to speak. She gave Patch one last pat on the head and walked toward the door, not looking back because she knew if she did, she wouldn't be able to leave. As she got into her car and started the silent engine, she looked in the rearview mirror. The Miller family was on the porch, and in the middle of them, sitting like a king on his throne, was Patch, looking at her. He didn't look sad. He looked at peace. He was home. Driving away from Elm Street, Clara cried. But these were not the tears of panic from the night of the storm. They were tears of a different kind. Tears of loss, yes, but also of a deep joy and overwhelming gratitude. She hadn't just sold a house. She had fulfilled the silent promise she had made to Mary Peterson's journal. She had taken care of her boy. And in the process, she had found a part of herself she didn't even know was lost. The minimalist apartment waiting for her in the city no longer seemed like a symbol of success. It seemed empty, and for the first time, Clara knew exactly what she needed to fill it. Not more trophies from her career, but maybe a water bowl, a rope toy, and a pair of loyal eyes waiting for her at the door. The story of Clara and Patch teaches us a truth that in our fast-paced world we often forget. The greatest value is not in what we own, but in what we refuse to abandon. We live in a constant search for efficiency, for success, for what is new and shiny. And in the process, we run the risk of discarding what is old, what is imperfect, what is inconvenient. But sometimes it is these inconveniences, an old dog, a house stuck in time, an emotion we don't want to feel, that hold the keys to our own humanity. patch with his unwavering loyalty wasn't guarding an empty house. He was protecting an ideal that love has no expiration date and that memory deserves to be honored. Clara, on her journey, didn't just sell a property, she made the most important transaction of her life. She traded market value for heart value. She learned that caring for a broken soul is the fastest way to mend your own. Perhaps you have a patch in your life, someone or something that the world considers outdated, but to you is a treasure. Or perhaps you, like Clara, are on a journey to rediscover what truly matters. If this story has touched your soul, if it has reminded you of a loyalty that inspired you, share this emotion. Leave a like so that this message of compassion and true value can reach more hearts. And tell us in the comments, what was the obstacle in your life that ended up becoming your greatest blessing? Thank you for joining us. And remember, before you discard what is old, stop and listen. It might just have one last important lesson to teach you. Until the next story.